begin in earnest, it is hard to believe that this is the penultimate session of the year for Parent University. And I think we said last time that we are in a very different position than we were even months ago. And I have just read or been exposed to or saw on the television that in most cases that if you've been vaccinated, you can go maskless, which is just sort of stunning after the year we've had. I have a huge collection of masks in all sorts of colors and fabrics, and now I feel as though those may be just museum pieces. So certainly glad to hear it. Always glad to see you all. And tonight, as we look at going back and as we look at returning to some semblance of an unmasked normal, we are going to talk about motivation and creativity. And motivation, as you've seen, is all around, whether it's Dr. Tapia on the ball field or whether it's Ms. Sakaris looking for motivation in a sweatshirt. It is definitely something for us to consider. And we know that for adolescents, what we've studied in terms of brain compatible learning and adolescent behavior, we know motivation can be among the stickiest of wickets. So let's take a look at that. Because at that age, they don't really seem to want to do much of anything. But we know that they are primed to engage in risk taking. So there's got to be some motivation there. And, you are likely aware of things that motivate them, even though they may not share them. But we'll look at perhaps how we can turn some extrinsic motivation into intrinsic motivation. And I was trying to find a good example I don't know how I can say this politely, as an older adult and getting older by the minute, trying to think of what is something that I've been challenged with where I had to struggle to find motivation. And then it dawned upon me, given the date, is that it is tax time. And I will tell you that taxes, although I am not reluctant to pay, so if the IRS is listening, I love to pay taxes. I don't like to do them. And in some other countries, you don't have to do the taxes. They just said, here's your bill. I know in the United Kingdom, I believe, that they say, here's how much you owe, pay it. And you
That's
go, okay.
correct.
They
Yes.
figure it out for you. But in the United States, not only do you have to pay, but now you also have to go through the agony of paying. And I was thinking, okay, how can I contextualize motivation in terms of paying taxes? And what I will do is I will try to give a practical example, but it is something that I've just done over the last 2 days where I had stacks of papers that I thought I had organized well, but of course I did not. They're just slips of paper all over the place with notes I've written to myself that I cannot decipher. But what got me motivated was not the fact that I may be getting some money back, which of course never happens, but I was using a platform called TurboTax. And this is not an advert for TurboTax, so don't worry. But they have a little thing where it shows what your refund is, what you owe, and you can watch the numbers go up and down. So it's kind of exciting. And they also sort of guide you through. So every step where you're screeching at yourself, they say, it's okay, just make sure you upload this. So we'll talk a little bit about how that works. As always, we'll make this presentation available to you. I know this is being recorded, but you can also find it on my slide share. And as we always have, we will come to an end just as we began with recurring themes for Parent University. So the idea that everything, every approach, every idea, every suggestion, every epiphany will be related to head, heart, and hands, and that magical intersectionality between these three elements that we call high performance. Now, as we go back to school and we look at in-person learning, of course, we think about high performance in terms of academic performance. There's nothing wrong with that. But we also talk about having peace of mind, a sense of confidence, a sense of competence, and motivation as well. Motivation to succeed not only in school, but also in life. So again, any advisement connects here. These are sort of the three magical elements that will guide us through. But really, when we're talking about motivation, at its core, we know that we are talking about the brain. And we can go back to our earliest understanding of what the brain is all about, because the brain is all about keeping us motivated to survive. And we know from our early learnings that we've got one purpose. The brain has one purpose, and we know it's a great place to store information. It's super absorbent. It is a wonderful sponge. It's a wonderful warehouse, but it helps us to navigate the world and helps us to survive. And the information we store helps us to survive. And it is specially designed to solve problems in the world. So we are naturally motivated, and our natural organic intrinsic motivation comes out of an instinctual need to survive. And when we talk about our earliest days, well, not maybe not our earliest days, but the earliest days of the great reptiles, their motivation had to do with who they're going to eat, who's going to eat them. That led to, of course, fight, flight, or freeze, which we've talked about ad nauseum, and rewarding activities that contribute to survival. And we talk about that wonderful neurochemical cocktail of persistence. That is a great motivator because it makes us feel good. So oftentimes we think about how can we motivate our kids? How can we motivate our staff? Really what we're talking about, and when we talk about motivation in its purest sense, it's just motivation to get through life. Part of what allows us to pursue creativity and motivation in a more sophisticated way is a sense of peace of mind. And the last time we talked, when we talked about going back to school, we know that it is an interruption of routine. Sure, there's a longer lead up. Sure, we're not acting on pure adrenaline. Sure, we're not sort of just being sent into remote learning. But we know the brain loves novelty, the brain loves to solve problems, but we all need routine to a certain degree because that gives us predictability and stability. How can you be motivated to do algebra, for example, if you are worried about getting beat up on the way home, or if you're worried about where your next meal is coming from, or you're worried that you're so far behind that you can't catch up? Well, there's nothing a teacher can do to motivate you. No cute prizes, no incentive that will motivate you unless you can find a sense of stability. This idea that the sun is going to rise and every new day is going to be a lot like the day that it followed. And I don't mean it's going to be exactly a carbon copy, but what I mean is you are not going to be suddenly away from your home. You are not suddenly going to be moving somewhere else. You are not going to be, threatened in any way. And when we have a sense of stability, we can focus on the more complex tasks at hand. And we're going to take a look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, something that you all may be familiar with, but we'll look at how when we take care of our most basic needs, our needs to survive, our needs for shelter, that we can actually look at motivation in a different way. So again, if we can mitigate the impacts of sudden disruption and ambiguity, we can keep the brain sort of out of survival mode, and provide an environment that is not stress heavy. Now, again, motivation and creativity all come from our survival instinct. So when we talk about the survival instinct, we are talking about creative ways to help us survive and navigate our lives and our environments. It doesn't mean the same thing. It does not mean that our chief concern about creativity in 2021 is being eaten, or who to eat, for example. So it goes beyond basic survival, but that is the root of creativity, to problem solve, to create things in novel ways. And when we look at components of creativity, again, in its purest sense, we're talking about something that is original. It's not really an extension of an existing idea, although that has its place. Maybe it's a new way of doing things. And it doesn't have to be, mind-blowing or earth-shattering. It can be a new way of doing something or coming something up with that's original that may be on a smaller scale. Another important part of creativity, it's functionality. So it needs to work. You can come up with a hundred different amazing ideas, but creativity also really speaks to something that works. And where do you see it? Well, you will see people who have interesting or unusual thoughts. I bet that you can go into E3 and you will find kids like that all over the place, just sort of not even thinking out of the box. They never had a box to begin with to constrain them, and they're incredibly creative people, and we want them to be able to flourish. Seeing the world from a new perspective. So it's not always doing something new, but it's also seeing things in a different way, offering new insights, personal discoveries, and people who engage in creative pursuits that change the world. And this may come from people that you may never expected. When we think about, the Steve Jobs and Wozniak in the garage, you would not have looked at them and thought these are going to be world-changing people. You look at somebody like Elon Musk, for all of his faults, you never would look at him and go, well, that's a guy who's going to change the world. So sometimes it comes from surprising places. When we talk about creativity, there are different levels of creativity. And this is not to say that one is more important than the other. They are just different ways of interpreting the creative endeavor. One is what we call the mini C. These are personally meaningful ideas that are only known to yourself. So what I do, for example, when I have a drawer full of ties and I arrange them in a different way so I can access them more easily, that is not going to change the nature of society as we know it, but it will make stuff easier for me. And it is meaningful to myself. When I find a new way of cleaning out the garage, which is not really cleaning, but looks clean on the outside, at least to impress my wife, that is creative. Is it earth shattering? Absolutely not. Does it mean anything to anyone beyond my wife and myself? No, but it is still a way of being creative. You move on to what we call the little c, from the mini c self to the little c, where we look at everyday thinking and problem solving, adapting to changing environments. We all did that. Anybody who engaged in remote education during the pandemic was engaged in the little c, where we had to change the way we think about approaches every day, and we adapt to changing environments. And usually we are using creativity to some degree in every day because our environments are always a little bit different. Then you can move up to something that we call the Pro C. And this is groups of professionals where creativity is applied in a certain discipline, but may not receive national or global attention. So when you are, let's say, in a lab and you find out a new way of analyzing data or using chemicals, or if you are at a university and you write an article about a new economic approach, or you may be um, working at a car repair shop and finding a new way of attacking a problem, that is creativity. Is it earth shattering? No. Is it getting closer to earth shattering? Probably. And it may be. But this really applies to professionals, new ways of doing things that is usually shared within a professional group. And then we're all familiar with what we call the big C. These are the world-changing ideas or inventions, medical innovation. People like Pfizer, people like Johnson and Johnson, I think, I hope, and people like Moderna, who are doing sort of these life altering. And it's not always done for good. I mean, the dark side hackers are certainly creative with what they do. And did they change the world? Yeah, or at least a certain number of states. Is it good stuff? No, it's bad stuff, but it is creative. And what do we require for any level of creativity? Well, energy, and we know that energy sometimes is in short supply. intelligence. And I would gather at E3, there's no short supply of intelligence. There's probably intelligence that just bleeds from the walls. But discipline is also very important and very, very difficult for adolescents. So creativity is like an energy that you need to harness, it is almost like nuclear energy, and you need to be able to focus it and channel it. Now, when we talk about motivation, so motivation and creativity are related. They're not the same thing, of course, but they're connected to one another. And motivation beyond our basic survival instinct is connected to self-perception. How do we see ourselves? Do we see ourselves as capable? Um, it is connected to our cognitive and affective growth. Are we sufficiently mature? What are the things that motivate us, and as well as to identity development? And we've talked a lot about resilience, and we've talked a lot about growth mindset, and motivation is key. If you believe that you can do it, and if you have the talent to do it, and you have the risk taking ability to do it, you may find motivation, and you might have to reach within. But this is to say that motivation is not a sort of singular variable. It is complex, it's multifaceted and dynamic. We're not universally motivated. I don't know anybody who's sort of universally motivated to do everything. But it is often circumstantial, it's often contextual, and it is brain compatible, and we'll see how. So what is motivation strictly defined? Well, it's energy or drive that gives behavior direction and focus. So again, we talk about channeling energies. We understand it in a variety of ways, and each of those ways have implications for how we go down life's path. We know that motivation, we talked about, the great reptiles, is at its heart instinctual, and it is inherited. Um, so things like instinct, drive, arousal, growth motivation, things like that, we know that people give energy and direction to their own behaviors for the most part without thinking. So people don't say, well, you know what, today I'm going to wake up and I am going to, I mean, we do say we're going to try and get myself motivated to get out of bed and do something. But usually when we're excited about something, when we're motivated to do something, we don't go through a painstaking analysis. We know that we get up and we're excited and we want to do it and we're motivated to do it and we're going to do it. So it is, for the most part, instinctual. And there's really two types of motivation. And I think we are all familiar with these. And these are certainly types of motivations that are used in educational settings. One is intrinsic. It's inwardly focused and naturally and satisfying. So often we'll talk about learning for the sake of learning, or finding motivation from within. Our inner drive is really what we're talking about. In education, and I know my parents used this quite a bit when I was not living up, let's say, to expectations, are the extrinsic motivators, the outwardly focused, the rewards and sanctions, of which I was afforded plenty of both. If you do well, we will, we will take you out for a driving lessons. Or if you don't pass this class, there is going to be hell to pay. So extrinsic motivation can be positive. It can be carrots, and it could also be sticks. What we like to do, what we would love to see, and what we strive to do is take extrinsic motivation and convert it into intrinsic motivation. So wouldn't it be great if there was a time where we could have kids who are pursuing learning for the love and joy of learning, versus, well, we're going to take you out to dinner, or we're going to give you this for doing that. And that is the conversion that we try to make. Now, when we talk about motivation, we can think of it in a variety of ways. And one of the ways for us to understand how it works is what we call the hierarchy of needs by Abraham Maslow. And this was an idea that our needs, all of our needs, can be sort of put into a hierarchy. when we looked at things like Bloom's taxonomy and other sort of brain compatible stuff, it runs on the same principle. But the idea here is that to get to sort of the top of the pyramid, you have to make sure that everything below is taken care of. And you really can't move from one to another without making sure that the first, and it runs brain compatible because it's all very much tied to our survival instinct. So our most basic needs are those we associate with physiology, things like food and water, warmth, rest, shelter, our most basic needs, safety and security. So you can imagine in a classroom, no matter what kind of wonderful instructional strategies a teacher presents, if a child's basic needs aren't being met, if they are hungry or if they feel insecure, they won't be able to neurologically focus on other needs. So once those two levels are attended to, then we go to these sort of social needs, which are belongingness and love, relationships, friendships, then onto our own sort of self-esteem needs, prestige, and feelings of accomplishment. So you can see this perhaps in the classroom as kids become more confident and more secure, and they feel supported and they feel as though they have friends. They can move forward up this hierarchy all the way to what Maslow talked about in terms of self fulfillment, this idea of reaching one's full potential, including creative activities. And that's where we see this interesting connection between creativity and motivation. Now, here's the rub about Maslow. He posits that you really can't do more than one or two things at once. So you can't have, you can't satisfy your needs for esteem at the same time that you are satisfying your needs for safety and physiology. And there's some debate about that. But this is one way of looking at it. And I think it's one way that helps us understand where our kids may be at any given time and what things can help to motivate them. So this idea, can we attend to their most basic needs first and then move up? Now, we can also look at something called expectancy theory. And again, this is another way of looking at motivation. And it is based on our self perception, what we get out of what we're doing, and how much value we put upon it. So, again, a little bit different than the way that Maslow looks at it, but expectancy theory says there are a few components. The first is expectancy. This is our self-belief. I can do this. So the first primary question is, can I do this in the way that I am being asked to do this? So if I was in ninth grade, for example, and I was asked to do algebra, and if I was trying to get motivated to do algebra, my view of expectancy was I have no idea. I cannot do this. I cannot achieve this. So that's where things begin to falter. Now, if you meet that criterion, then the next is instrumentality. So if I do what I'm being asked, what am I going to get from it? And it feels very extrinsic. It feels very outwardly motivated, but it can also be inwardly motivated. So am I going to get a sense of satisfaction, a sense of confidence by being able to do this? So there's a degree of instrumentality that says, is this something that's worth my time? Well, I can certainly paint a house, I can achieve that, but what am I going to get out of that except a lot of paint on me? So maybe that's not something I want to do. And that's where what we call valence, or the value that somebody places on a particular outcome. So the way expectancy theory works is you got to consider all of these three things, and based on how we interpret these, you're going to find a level of motivation. So if you are in an algebra class and you're a whiz at algebra, and you know that doing well in algebra is going to get you an A into the next class and the approval of your parents, and you place a high value on all of that, There's your motivation right there, be it intrinsic or extrinsic. Um, Another way, a little bit of looking at that. Now, we can also look at things in terms of what we call attribution theory. And again, it's expectancy theory with a little bit of a twist. And it is how we understand what we are able to do. And of course, we know um, with adolescence, going right back to Bart Simpson, who said, "Oh, it's not me, it's not my fault." So, how do we attribute what we are able to do? So, attribution theory looks at things that are in our control or perceived to be in our control, things that are internal, and things that are external. So when you look at kids who have a high level of self-esteem and a high level of achievement, they will attribute their successes to things that are internal, stable, and uncontrollable. So internal and stable is ability. So my ability may not be completely in my control. And this, when we remember when we talked about growth mindset, there is an idea of a fixed mindset is I only get so many smarts. That's not in my control, but it's in me and it's for the most part stable. Things that are internal and unstable are the amount of effort. Sometimes I'm going to put more effort into it. Sometimes I'm not going to put more effort into it, and that has to do with expectancy theory and how much I value something. Things that are external and stable but out of your control, how difficult the tasks will be, and of course there is luck. So this is not so much about calculating motivation or determining how much motivation one has, but really to what do we attribute our skills and abilities and what we are able to do. So if you put these all together in sort of a nicely stitched quilt, you'll see how all of this comes together. And of course, it all factors into this idea of attending to the socio-emotional first. We see this in Maslow, we see this in expectancy theory, and we see this in attribution theory, the importance of attending to the socio-emotional, this idea of clarity, confidence, and peace of mind. So again, no matter how good a teacher is, no matter how great a parent is at home, no matter what sorcery you provide, if kids are in survival mode, they are not going to be able to engage in any of this because their motivators, of course, are going to be different. Their motivators, they're motivated to get through the day and to find a way to get through the day, not how to do trigonometry. So again, it is a calculus that you will have to do, a difficult calculus because teens, as you well know, tweens and teens are not always forthcoming about how they feel. And we've talked about this at great length. But we do know that in the standard lexicon of teendom and tweendom, there are really two words to describe one situation, which are good and fine. And the rest is your detective work. All right. Again, we've talked about really how everything relates to head, heart, and hands. And we've also talked about when you really want to get to the heart of something, the root of something, you go back to the neurochemistries of persistence and avoidance. And we know that the neurochemistry of persistence, now you can see where this may be linked to motivation because these neurochemicals make us feel good. Endorphins and dopamine and oxytocin. Again, I'm going to clarify because this is being recorded. This is oxytocin. It is spelled in a very similar way to something else. It is not OxyContin, not OxyContin. This is oxytocin, which is the neurochemical that we call the puppy love chemical, the trust chemical, the relationships chemical, our feelings of warmth. So again, if we are being flooded with this sort of neurochemistry, it is an intrinsic motivator because we feel good about what we're doing and we know what the other side of this coin looks like, and it makes it much harder to receive any type of motivation. It makes it much harder to engage in creativity. But what is sort of the magic calculation? How do we sort of figure out how we can get motivation intrinsically and at least provide opportunities for doing so? And we can go back to something that we call flow, which is really the essence of motivation. Um, this came out of pop psychology during the 70s. At the same time, primal scream therapy came out. So it's a little bit dodgy in a lot of ways. Primal scream therapy really sort of didn't stay the course as much as this did. But we'll talk about what this means. Um, when we talk about flow, we know that it occurs when a person faces a clear set of goals that require appropriate responses. Where's creativity? Where's motivation? It lies somewhere around clarity. Now, our normal lives are characterized by chaos and ambiguity. So when we engage in activities that cause us to flow, that activate this wonderful neurochemical cocktail, it allows us to focus on goals that are clear and compatible and provide immediate feedback. So you can imagine in a classroom, if you know what you're supposed to do, if you see how they relate to you and you're getting feedback on how to make corrections and how to do well, it will help you become motivated. And the way that it has been described is that it provides flashes of intense living against the dull background of everyday life. Now, imagine being in the classroom and having these wonderful flashes of excitement and engagement. Is that going to get you motivated? Yes, most likely. I know that if I am in the office and I have an opportunity to engage in something exciting, or if I'm invited to an event that is truly compelling, it gets me into that state of intrinsic motivation. And that's really what we talk about when we talk about flow. Now, the father of flow, and I've been practicing this name for years and still have not really got it right, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who is a professor at the Claremont Graduate University. I used to be, I think, at the University of Michigan. He said, of all of the virtues we can learn, no trait is more useful, more essential for survival. Now, again, I'm highlighting survival because when we talked about motivation originally, we're talking about survival, and more likely to improve the quality of life than the ability to transform adversity into an enjoyable challenge. Now, when you think about school, when you think about getting through life, when we talk about things that motivate us or cause us to be creative, that's kind of really what we're talking about. Now, we're talking about creativity, we're talking about motivation. Here is a perspective about creativity. Flow is perhaps most associated with creativity. A writer experiencing a state of flow may become so immersed in their work that hours fly by without them even noticing. That is intrinsic motivation at work. The words flow easily and quickly. Now, probably a lot of you have to write for work, or I mean, of course, emails. And sometimes when we are plagued by writer's block, it is just impossible. But when we know when things just sort of spill out of us, when we are at our peak creativity, we are motivated to keep moving forward. We feel confident and we feel competent and we move. Um, Same with an artist spending hours working on a painting and emerging with a great deal of progress that seems to fly by quickly. So when we talk about creativity, we're talking about time distortion, which is very important because our minds are fully engaged. Um, Again, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi says the best moments in our lives are not passive. They are not receptive or relaxing times. This does not mean we should not enjoy being relaxed, because I think we probably all do, and we probably have earned it over this year. But the best moments occur if a person's body or mind is stretched to its limits. Again, motivation, again, creativity, in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. if you think about what we would like to see in schools, really, this is the kind of stuff that we're talking about. And when um, Professor Csikszentmihalyi was studying this concept, this idea of complete immersion, some things came up. So you can see stacks of books, that you become engaged in. Now, those little pills, just in case you can't see them, those are not drugs, those are not pills. What those are caplets with different social media logos on them. And when we talked about social media, you may remember we previewed Flow because they were very addictive. And I think the picture here is trying to make the connection between addiction and social media because they know what they're doing. When we look at Jimi Hendrix, for example, was an amazing musician. He played the guitar upside down. It was restrung for the left hand. He often was looking into space. He would set it on fire. He'd put it behind his back. He'd play with his toes. But it was absolutely amazing what would come out of that instrument. And everybody sort of sat back and went, how is he doing this? If he can do it like that, then certainly I can do it. You look at Babe Ruth, who was a baseball player from many, many years ago, an absolutely phenomenal hitter, and a phenomenal player. He was a glutton. He was a drunk. He smoked a lot of cigars and partied throughout the night. But when he came up to the plate and called his shots, there was absolutely nothing like it. And people would sit back and say, well, if he can do it, because if you look at our modern day Padres, God bless them, and look at Babe Ruth, you'd say this guy doesn't look like he should be able to play baseball to the same degree. But in point of fact, he was absolutely amazing. So a large part of flow is making it seem to the outside like you could do it too. So when people watch Jimi Hendrix play guitar, a lot of people bought guitars thinking they could play like Jimmy because Jimmy wasn't paying attention or didn't look like it, and were awful. People who would look at Babe Ruth and say, well, I can do that, wound up finding out that they couldn't. And you'll also see down below some artistry, this idea of engaging in creative arts, all in the name of flow. So what are we talking about when we're talking about flow? This is, again, the essence of motivation. This is the essence of creativity. And it's described as a Zen-like intensive state when somebody becomes completely immersed in an experience. We talked about this when we talked about social media. We talked about this when we talked about gaming, but it can occur with a book that you just can't put down. It occurs with musicians. It occurs with athletes. It occurs with writers. Some people will binge watch. Casinos are famous not just because they keep you inebriated and they don't have any windows, but creating a state where you just keep going and going and going. People have called it the optimal experience. Musicians have called it being in the groove. And if you played music before or listened to music, you know when somebody is in the groove because they are just unstoppable. Others will call it being in the zone, and it is a place where time is distorted. And I think we've all been involved in activities where we're really not sure how much time we've spent doing it, where you lose oneself so that you are so focused, you're not paying attention to the world around you. And that is when we are at our most creative. That is when we are at our most motivated. And what we found through the research is that this is a cross-cultural and universal experience. So everybody experiences this in one way or the other. And as we understand it, we see it as a connection between emotion. We've talked about the importance of emotion, motivation, and internalization. All of the stuff that we want for school kids, being emotionally involved, being motivated, and having the motivation come from within, this sort of joy that is associated with learning. How does it work? Well, what it comes down to really is a fine balance between skill and challenge. We know that the brain is built for problem solving. And we know that there is a gap between an individual's ability or level of skill and the level of difficulty in the challenge. If you think about this idea of reaching for the brass ring where you're just about to grab it, you just can touch it, but you can't pull it away, where things can't be too difficult or things can't be too easy, and flow cannot occur that way. So when you think about the way video games are constructed, you understand that level 2 is not the same as level 1, because level 1 repeated would be too easy because the brain already knows that. Level 10 would be too difficult and cause you to give up. Level 2 is just that much more difficult. It causes you to reach just that much more. Goals and expectations are clear and attainable. Remember when we talked about the importance of clarity and ambiguity? So right there, we're giving the brain exactly what it wants. High degree of concentration in a limited field of attention. That's why people love to binge watch. That's why people love to engage in gaming or social media, because it allows us to focus. Not what's going on, the dog is barking, somebody's at the door, all of that kind of thing. You can focus on that one thing and do it very well. We talked about the myth of multitasking earlier, and we've got the same thing going on here. Losing self-consciousness. Now, not losing consciousness, that is not the same thing. If you're losing consciousness, that's something else. But not being aware of yourself or what you're doing, not thinking, is my hair okay? Or what do I look like? But really just focused. And we know that there is a sense of time transcendence, that things tend to pass very quickly, very slowly, or in slow motion. And we've know this from interviews with concert musicians, concert pianists who have been playing for 2 hours and have become so involved. When they come off stage and they are asked about how long they've been playing, they'll say, I don't know, 45 minutes. They're not focused because they are so involved. Now, here's the thing, there's a degree of purposefulness and a degree of intentionality. So we know that most enjoyable activities are not natural, they demand effort. So part of motivation, part of creativity is effort. And even if it is an effort that you are reluctant to make it first, it's that idea of pushing yourself, coming out of your comfort zone and being successful. But once the interaction starts to provide feedback, it usually begins to be intrinsically rewarding. You might go, well, what are you talking about? Well, I will tell you, in 7th grade, we had a really bad production of Our Town. I mean, just absolutely horrible. But if you're not familiar with Our Town, I think everybody in the town who's dead does a monologue about what their lives were like. And anybody who has been on stage at that age knows that the spotlight goes on and you think you're ready, you think you're prepared, and then you start staring at the light and you forget everything. You step out of your comfort zone and you begin talking, people begin to listen, people begin to react, and all of a sudden it just starts to spill out of you. There is where the intrinsic reward lies. So the idea is get out of your comfort zone, do things with intentionality, and make sure that you put an effort in. That's where you're going to find motivation. That is where you're going to find creativity. And even this really strange stuff that our kids do now. Of course, when we talk about creative play, a lot of times we are talking about smaller kids, but this also happens with older kids too. And remember, when I talked about reaching with the brass ring as a metaphor for flow, you can see it right there. And you can see this little girl who's going around on the carousel. She just can touch the ring, but she'll probably pass it before she's able to grab it off. But what does that do? She just is able to touch it. Well, that's going to compel her, that will motivate her, that will give her the purposeful intent to get back up on the carousel and to keep trying, and keep trying. And that's what we want to be able to do. So even when our kids are doing things that we might think are just inane, our tweens and teens, really what they're actually doing out of school are things like abstract thinking, creativity, imagination, all of these great things, cooperation, sharing, empathy, conflict resolution. So it's important that when we talk about motivation, we talk about creativity, that these are not necessarily classroom-led experiences in their entirety. It has a lot to do with those things that we see outside. Um, this is a slide you may be familiar with. This is the diagram of flow. But what you are seeing, and you'll see binge watching social media and video games because they are masterful at flow. We know that from our last session. But what you will see is flow is a channel and you can't really schedule it. You can't say, okay, when we come back from lunch, what we're going to do is get into a Zen-like intensive state and you will experience motivation like you have not before. You can't construct it artificially. What you can do through smartly differentiated instruction and through support at home is provide multiple opportunities during the day to find that state. And what we know is that in this magical channel, that's where you find motivation, persistence, resilience, and creativity, and sort of the addictive qualities of the neurochemical reward system. Can you flow all day? No. Are you going to fall out of the channel? Yes. Are there some things in life that will not cause you to flow? Part of my job is stamping credential letters. And no matter what sort of engaging environment or purpose I find in it, it does not intrinsically motivate me to want to keep doing it. I just want to get it over with, which I guess is a type of motivation. But the idea here is both at school and at home to always create a fine balance between skill and challenge. Let the brain do what it wants to do best. And if you can get through school days like this, you will want to come back the next day and the next day and the next day. And your extrinsic motivators will turn intrinsic because the brain is doing what it is built to do, and you are finding success in doing it. And I don't want to oversimplify things just by saying, okay, well, just set up some flow times and everything will be good. This is a complex calculus. It is a delicate choreography. But I think you will see that if parents and teachers can work together at creating these opportunities, so much the better. And here's another way of looking at it and where you can see how people come in and fall out of the flow channel. So this idea, when we're exceeding our comfort zone, when we're pushing ourselves just that much more, we fall out of the flow channel because we go into anxiety because it's something new and the brain is now trying to deal with it. But we find as we are able to deal with it, we find an increasing level of skills and we pop right back into the channel. So the idea behind flow is that you are always going to create a very fine gap, a very fine balance between skill and challenge. And as you pop out of your comfort level, the challenge increases, your brain will kick in and compensate with skills, and you'll pop right back into the channel. When you've mastered the stuff, you're going to pop out of the channel into boredom, and then the cycle repeats and repeats. Now, it doesn't repeat this slowly because, of course, the brain is much faster than that, but basically that's how it gets. You can think of the flow channel as an equilibrium state. And we just try to do this again and again and again. And when we talk to teachers about differentiation of instruction and attending to cognitive and affective needs and all of the learning styles and modalities, we're trying to get them to this point. And of course, we know that it's better to start doing this as early as possible. Does this mean by the time that your kids are at E3, it's too late? No, not at all. As a matter of fact, what we know from our geography of the brain is that the teenage brain is sort of primed for this. It is often consumed by other things, but it is primed for this. And this is a graphic that you have probably seen before, but really we want to try and catch our kids before they hit 28. So you got some time. Here's some other perspectives on this idea of flow. We know individuals who can transform hopeless situations into challenges to be overcome just through the force of their personalities. So, this is where you see motivation and creativity turning into confidence and competence. This ability to persevere despite obstacles and setbacks, here's where growth mindset folds in, is the quality most people admire in others. So think about how all of this is working together, where you have the socio emotional, you have friendships, you have these basic needs being attended to that allow you to persist and overcome. The most important trait, not only for succeeding in life, for enjoying it as well. This idea to persist in spite of obstacles, adopting a growth mindset. It's not fun, it's not comfortable, but it is admirable. And flow is family friendly. So it's not something that you solely find in the classroom. So when we talk about family interaction, we know that there's compatibility between our goals and the goals of others in the home. And we can all meet each other's flow expectations because we are well attuned. Parents, perhaps most of all, are better attuned to know what this sort of optimal experience looks like. And really, if you really want to kickstart flow, in its most basic level, one of the simplest and best extrinsic pleasures, both for parents and kids alike, is to know what your child is proud of doing, to be proud of them, and then to share that with them. And again, for adolescents, for teens and tweens, it is not necessarily that easy. But what are some of the things that you can do? Well, again, flow is social and flow is family friendly. It's difficult to flow alone all the time. So you can develop as an individual, your kids can develop as individuals, but connecting with you and the rest of the family through trust and intimacy. Again, tweens and teens have a harder time with this, but it is possible. Your supportive environments that limit distractions and disruptions. That doesn't mean that you have to do so all the time. Of course, home life can be chaotic at times. But if you're able to do that, not only can you inspire flow, but you can enhance their executive function, that sort of decision making process that we strive for. Supporting an environments and activities that offer security, challenges, choice, empowerment, and complexity. All of those things that we try to do in schools, all of those things that are friendly to Maslow, friendly to all of the things that we've talked about, do at home too. What prevents flow from occurring? Being overly self-aware, overly self-conscious. Um, Challenges that are foisted upon someone. So rather than engaging a challenge on one's own, rather than stepping out of one's comfort zone on its own, certainly challenges are going to come, and kids will have to deal with them. But usually, the ones that allow them to flow are the ones that they select. Um, Overly anxious about outcomes. So when we talk, for example, I remember my mother saying, if you don't get an A on this report card, there's going to be, whatever to pay. Well, that didn't get me flowing. That got me scared. That's the carrots and the stick. This is more stick than carrots. There was no way that I could truly engage because I was so anxious about the result, and certainly distractions. So I know that we are just about at time, and I wanted to leave room for questions and comments. But what you will see here, this is really sort of a culmination of a lot of the things that we have been talking about in terms of brain compatibility and socio-emotional needs and a little bit of social media. So I hope this was informative. Also, if you have specific cases where you're asking about motivation or creativity, send them my way. I'm right here for you. So to all of you, thank you. Enjoy your weekend, and I will see you on Tuesday. And appreciate your time and appreciate your attention. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.